Let's go now to the final assignment for this class. You had to choose one of the short stories we studied in this class. Which short story you selected and why?
Peter and I actually did El Periquillo Sarmiento, and we did that together. And we did an alternate ending for it, and it had started out with there's the three main characters, Dr. Brigante, Periquillo, and Andres. And Andres and Periquillo rob Dr. Brigante of his identity, and they become doctors in his place. And they use false medical language, and they take the place of him. So where we started our alternate ending was when they had a patient that was a tax collector, and they had his family, and they had him tricked that they could cure him. So we decided to kind of put a twist to our ending, and we had mentioned that they knew the family and the tax collector was catching on to them. So they thought they were going to get caught. So they excused themselves from the room. They went in the back room together. And Periquillo was pacing, from end of the room to the other end, and he didn't know what to do. And Andres ends up coming up with a plan that he thinks that they should go call the ambulance or call the hospital, and they should come and pick the tax collector and his family up, because they don't know what's wrong with him, and if they get caught, then they could be in serious trouble. And then he decides to say before they come, so that they don't have to talk to the hospital or the ambulance, that they're going to go out the window and escape. So Periquillo decides this is a good plan, and him and Andres walk out the door, and they tell the tax collector and his family, this is what we're going to do. We're going to call the ambulance, they're going to come for you, and they're going to cure you, because we're not sure, but we're just going to, we hope that this is what's wrong with you. And before the ambulance could even come, the two escaped out the back window, and they ended up driving off. And the last thing that Periquillo said was, I learned my lesson, and that I'm never going to do that again.
We chose El Periquillo Sarmiento, which is a story about a false doctor who's basically a quack and pretends to be an actual doctor by stealing a real doctor's titles and treating mostly hypochondriacs and other patients who think that they're sick, but they're not really sick.
In our alternate ending, we turn the main character into someone who gets their just rewards. They, have the patient on the table, and because of a mistake they made, transfusion, the patient turns into a zombie, and they have to kill the zombie with a scalpel, and then he and his assistant jump from the window, and then they're caught by, I believe, the priest, and then handed over to the wife and the daughter of the patient.
I selected Periquillo Sarmiento. It was a great story. I actually liked it. This story right here, I actually really enjoyed it. And it was about a boy. His name is Andres. He had one of his associates or whatever. He was a false doctor, and he would scheme the people of the town saying he was a doctor. I could cure you, and whatever. And he ends up scheming at the end when they're doing Los Santos Oleos at the end. He ends up skiing a dying individual, saying, putting the blessings and trying to take his pulse and whatnot. And the priest kind of knew. So, even though he got away, my alternate ending was that it was almost like a double deceivement. That the woman that gave him the bag of money, he thought it was 12 ounces of gold. So in my story, everything happened there, but instead of getting the 12 ounces of gold, that he was deceived at the end by the woman by giving him 12 ounces of silver. And I had the priest coming in at the end saying, that's why you don't deceive one's people. Kind of like more of a religious kind of take on it. But I kind of saw the irony of Andres deceiving that woman and the family, and then the woman deceiving him back without him knowing.
It was La Casa Tomada by Julio Cortázar. And the way I rewrote it was that the house was actually taken over by these living shadows. I kind of turned it into a little bit of a ghost story because there were so many different questions as to what it could have been. It could have been burglars, it could have been rats, and being a fantasy writer, I felt like it would have been it was a good opportunity, I think, to experiment with the kind of more ghostly aspect. And Irene, the sister, she decides that she's going to stand up and defend her brother, is really apprehensive, but decides to go along with her anyway. Eventually they go into the library wing to find out, because that was the source of the noise that they had heard, and the brother sees this giant shadow, this living form of just black that's behind her, and you know, he's speechless, and he watches her get dragged away into the darkness and doesn't know what to do, and then ends up leaving the house, which goes back to the original ending.
Did you like using creative writing for this final assignment, and why?
I love doing creative writing. It's one of my favorite parts because you can take what the story is and you know how it's going to end, but you can twist it into your own ending. And especially doing that presentation in that story, it allowed you to take what you were learning and twist it into something else. And it made it more, you know, fun and enjoyable. And it was, you learned a lot from doing it.
I personally loved the creative assignment because, I mean, first of all, I got to write about zombies, and that's kind of awesome. And secondly, I know with at least in my experience with creative pieces, I use a lot of words that I wouldn't otherwise use, especially when you're writing about a zombie. So there was a lot of terminology that I had to look up that is kind of unusual. Like, for instance, when we first find out that that character turns into a zombie, I say that he lurched towards his daughter. And I'm like, how do you say lurched in Spanish? And it's not exactly something you would hear in most classic literature, but in a creative piece, absolutely. So.
Right, I agree. I really enjoyed it, especially because I'm an English major with a focus in creative writing, so it's not often that you get to actually create your own writing in Spanish. And I think we've gotten to the level where, you know, we still need to look up vocabulary, and you're always learning, but we have a pretty good grasp of the language, so it's really enjoyable.
I love 432 for that reason. Was at the end project, it was very project based, and you can showcase a lot of short answer questions, the quizzes at the end. So yeah, I did like the short answer and the creativity part of it, because it really showcased it, because you have so many different takes, from zombies to a double deceitment. So it's just interesting. So you just bring the best out of people.
There's a difference, I think, between creative writing in English and creative writing in Spanish, that there's something special about both of them that don't really translate into each other. And you know, in a lot of my creative writing in English, you know, it's much more about, you know, what can I do next, and how can I move the plot forward more. But then in this project, it was about, like, how can I make this instance as impactful as I can. And I think I kind of, writing in such a small space too, being that the rewriting assignment was a shorter one, it really forced me to be careful with the words that I chose, and make them as you know, powerful as I could.